Welcome to the Dub Dive. Today, we're really getting into the story of the Gambia. It's this tiny nation that, as we found digging through our sources, has a surprisingly complex and, well, resilient history. It's a place defined by its unique geography, this incredibly slender strip of land, just wrapping itself around the majestic Gambia River. You've got the Atlantic on one side, and then fascinatingly, it's completely surrounded on its other three land borders by just one neighbor, Senegal. It's quite something geographically. This West African nation, its past is as rich and winding as that river it's named after. It was a British colony. Now it's an independent republic. And interestingly, we found it's become a pretty popular winter getaway for Europeans, mainly because of its mild winters. So our mission today for this deep dive is basically to give you a real shortcut to understanding this remarkable country. We've pulled together insights from articles, research, historical accounts, all sorts of things to help you grasp the most important nuggets. We'll cover everything from its earliest inhabitants, the whole colonial struggle, its vibrant culture, economic realities, the political shifts, and the resilient spirit of its people. We promise it'll be an engaging conversation, hopefully packed with surprising facts and the essential takeaways you need to feel, properly informed. Okay, so let's unpack this. What really makes the Gambia physically distinct? You often hear it highlighted as the smallest country on the African mainland. Think roughly the size of Connecticut in the U.S. Its unique shape, that long, thin form, is literally defined by the Gambia River. It stretches inland for over 300 kilometers, almost entirely hugged by Senegal and the Atlantic coastline, barely 60 kilometers long. What's particularly striking is its capital, Banjul. It sits on St. Mary's Island, which is essentially a sandbar right at the mouth of the river. When the British settled it back in 1816, their urban planning was quite innovative for the time. They even used the natural wetlands and mangrove forests to try and combat the mosquito population moving inland. Then, just east of Banjul, you have Serekunda, that's the most populous city, the commercial heart, really. And then there's Bucko, a resort area famous for attracting what they call special dollar tourists.
Ah, yes, those high-spending visitors. They're a significant chunk of government revenue, aren't they?
Exactly. A crucial part of the economy.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is how this distinctive geography isn't just a footnote. It profoundly shaped everything. That river, for instance, it's not just water. It's a major inland transport route, stretching over 1,000 kilometers eastward deep into Senegal. This made it absolutely vital for trade throughout history. But it also meant it was historically a theater of conflict. Empires clashed over control. Its very shape dictates so much from those early trade links right up to its current tourism industry. It really underscores how, well, geographic destiny can play out on a national scale, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's clear the river isn't just a line on a map. It's the nation's lifeline, its spine, really. So if the river truly is the lifeline, how did it shape the earliest human stories there? And how did that connection evolve when European powers arrived on the scene? Our sources tell us the earliest known inhabitants were the Soninke people. Then came the Mandinka, who spread into the area around the 9th century AD. And what's really critical to grasp is how these Mandinka people basically turned the Gambia River into a major trade link with the powerful Ghana Empire. It became this bustling route for gold, ivory, spices, and sadly, slaves as well. Then the Europeans show up. The Portuguese were the first, exploring the Gambia-Rio Grande basin as early as 1446. One navigator apparently sailed 180 kilometers inland, pretty impressive for the time, and it was even documented in the Book of the Gambia. They built forts like the Jesus Tower, but eventually they were driven out by 1751, losing their posts along the river.
Which sort of opened the door for others, didn't it?
Precisely. It paved the way for British and French interest. They became fierce rivals themselves. King Charles II actually ceded Gambia to the Royal African Company in 1661, which led to the British fortifying James Island. Bathurst, which is now Banjul, then became a major port for the slave trade. This brought, as the sources say, huge profits to the British Empire. That is, until slavery was outlawed in British possessions in 1807. The Gambia officially became a British colony in 1865, and Banjul itself was annexed in 1871. Now, you might expect immediate resistance, but interestingly, our sources say that initially, some local chiefs actually expressed gratitude for European gifts and help with community development. But that didn't last long. It soon gave way to what's described as open hostility.
And it wasn't just a sudden flip, was it? There were clear reasons.
No, exactly. The sources point to the settlers' unbridled desire for land, outright land grabs often using crafty lawyers, and just a complete disregard for existing treaties they'd made. This friction, this tension, it all boiled over into a series of intense battles between 1821 and 1822.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? How these early interactions, even those that started with some level of cooperation, could sour so quickly. That mix of cooperation and exploitation fundamentally laid the groundwork. It shaped the conflicts and the sociopolitical landscape for generations, long after the colonial flags came down. It really highlights how power dynamics and the drive for resources can completely alter relationships.
Indeed. The seeds of future challenges were definitely sown back then. So, moving into the 20th century, we start to see the Gambia's journey towards self-rule. Nationalism begins to rise. This was influenced partly by Islamization, the role of Muslim schools, marabouts, things like that. Interestingly, though, the early nationalists, influenced by Pan-Africanism, they initially formed social clubs. They were seeking recognition from the British, not necessarily pushing for immediate, outright political movements against them. The Stonetown Uprising in 1905 is seen as a key early marker of that growing discontent, though. Fast forward, the Gambia gained independence on February 18, 1965. Initially, it was a constitutional monarchy within the Commonwealth.
And then it became a republic shortly after.
That's right. On April 24, 1970, it became a republic. The First Republic, which lasted from 1965 to 1994, was under President Dada Kauraba Jawara. This period is often described as one of relative calm. Jawara pursued a self-help development philosophy, things like the 1974-1980 National Development Plan. But despite this initial stability, discontent started bubbling up. Obligations to the IMF led to stricter fiscal measures, cuts in the civil service.
Austerity measures, essentially. That rarely goes down well.
Exactly. It ignited public unrest. This actually culminated in riots in Banjul in the late 1970s, specifically over a dramatic rise of bread prices, a very basic need. And this whole era, 30 years of Jawara's rule, ended very abruptly. There was a coup d'etat on July 28, 1994. It was led by junior military officers, and one key figure among them was Jammeh. They ousted Jawara.
That shift from relative calm over 3 decades to a sudden coup is quite something. Thinking about that initial self-help idea and then the IMF pressure, were there specific internal policies during Jawara's time that maybe inadvertently made things worse? Or perhaps just made the country more vulnerable to that public discontent before the external economic shocks really hit hard? It really raises a crucial question, I think, about how vulnerable these young democracies can be, especially when facing tough economic pressures and social unrest. Situations like that can unfortunately pave the way for military interventions.
That's a really critical point, and it absolutely sets the stage for the next quite challenging chapter, Jammeh's rule. This spanned from 1994 right up to 2017. Now, despite initially promising to safeguard democratic values, that was the initial rhetoric, his regime quickly went downhill. Our sources paint a grim picture. An absence of a constitution for the first 4 years, widespread arbitrary rule, and really severe human rights abuses. We're talking things like torturing of suspects and arbitrary arrests becoming disturbingly common practices. We also saw a significant shift towards political Islam under Jammeh. In May 2005, he actually publicly promised to transform the country into an Islamic state. The sources we looked at detail alleged death threats against people proclaiming the Trinity, arrests of Christian pamphleteers, and even a case where a chief was replaced for evicting Christian missionaries.
So a real clampdown on religious freedom alongside the political repression.
Absolutely, and economically. His rule was marked by what sources call grand corruption and undisciplined fiscal management. This had real consequences, like the Gambia losing its trade access status with the U.S. back in 2005. The human rights violations during this period were just grave: enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, and a systematic suppression of political dissent. Just imagine, this included the assassination of a prominent figure, Sadibu Haidara, and arbitrary arrests of political activists continued right up until 2016. But, and this is a really important but, in the face of all this oppression, the Gambia civil society showed incredible resilience. Before 1994, the space for these kinds of organizations was quite limited, but after 1994, activism just burgeoned. It grew directly in response to Jammeh's increasing authoritarianism.
Even though it was dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. Independent human rights reporting was basically criminalized. Activists were arrested, forced into exile, like the director of the Gambia Center for Human Rights. Yet their responses were incredibly creative and inventive. They used art and activism to confront, campaign, and mobilize resistance. This even involved things like creative meditative tools focused on themes of home, love, memory, hope, powerful stuff. Civil society played an absolutely crucial role in pushing for systemic change. This culminated in movements like Gambians for a Better Future, which demonstrably contributed to Jammeh finally being unseated in the 2016 elections.
What's truly striking there is that paradox, isn't it? A repressive regime trying to crush dissent actually ends up inadvertently fostering a stronger, more creative, more determined civil society. It wasn't just that activism survived, it burgeoned, it got smarter, using art, using collective action as really potent tools against tyranny. The way human rights advocacy became this unifying force despite such severe suppression. It's a powerful testament to the resilience of people. How do you think that whole experience has shaped their approach now in this new era of democracy?
It's a profound testament to the human spirit, definitely. And that brings us nicely to the next chapter, which is thankfully more hopeful. The 2016 election saw Adama Barrow defeat Jammeh. Now, Jammeh initially conceded, which was this huge moment of relief, globally even, but then he tried to overturn the results, declared a state of emergency, a very dangerous move.
Right, things got very tense there for a while.
They did. But it led to decisive international intervention. A coalition, ECOWAS, the African Union, the UN, they invoked a military option, basically said, you need to go. Faced with that pressure, Jammeh finally relinquished power on January 21st, 2017, after 22 long years. He went into exile in Equatorial Guinea. So today, the Gambia is a presidential republic. It has a multi-party system, a stark contrast to the Jammeh era. And we are seeing positive signs of reform. For instance, the Department of State for Health and Social Welfare has been working since 2006, actually, to draft new mental health policy and legislation. The clear goal here is to replace that really outdated, draconian, suspected lunatic detention act from 1964.
That old colonial era law.
Exactly. To replace it with something that ensures human rights for people with mental disorders, it's a significant step towards a more just society.
And if we connect that to the bigger picture, I mean, the sheer importance of a peaceful transfer of power, even if it needed that international nudge, it just can't be overstated, especially in a region that's often seen political instability. That successful transition sends a really powerful message. And the commitment to internal reforms, like tackling that old mental health care law, it's not just about fixing outdated legislation. It really underscores both the challenges left over from the past and the forward-looking aspirations of this new era. It suggests a commitment to human dignity that goes beyond just the political sphere.
A vital commitment indeed. Okay, let's shift gears a bit now. Let's explore the vibrant heart of the Gambia, its people, their rich cultural heritage. Our sources point to 7 major ethnic groups. You've got the Mandinka, Wolof, Fua, Jola, Sera, Balenta, Serahuli, and Creole, plus other settled groups like Akus, Lebanese, and Indians. Quite a mix. English is the official language, but Mandinka and Wolof are the main local languages you'll hear, reflecting those dominant ethnic groups. And religion-wise, the Gambia is predominantly Muslim. Around 90% of the population identify as Muslim. Cultural practices are deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. Take marriage, for example, among the Mandinka. It typically happens between ages 18 and 25. Polygamy, having up to 4 wives, is widely accepted. Many marriages are arranged, often within the same ethnic group, and involve a bride price. Baby naming ceremonies are a huge deal. They happen on the 7th day after birth. The husband buys 2 sheep for slaughter, and boys traditionally get a Muslim name then. Education traditionally saw boys attending Makra's local Quranic schools, learning Arabic and the Quran. Girls typically learned domestic skills within the family compound. Further schooling for girls was often seen as optional.
Though that's likely changing now, I imagine.
Yes, patterns are shifting, but that was the traditional model described in our sources. Now, the Gambian music scene is incredibly vibrant. You can broadly break it down into 3 major genres: traditional, contemporary, and religious. Traditional music really reflects the entire cultural heritage of the different ethnic groups. It has unique rhythms, unique dances performed at special occasions, naming ceremonies, weddings, harvest festivals. You'll see dances with these undulating movements of the waist, lots of laughter, swaying fans, clapping, singing. It's very participatory. Instruments include various drums, especially the impressive 30-40-inch Mankati drum used for Zudong music, but also flutes, trumpets, rattles, things like that. And then there's this really unique genre called calabash music. It uses mini drums made from bottle gourds, calabashes. It's described almost as a conversation starter, a way for rival musicians to have a back and forth using words and rhythm. Our sources even shared this great anecdote from the 1960s. During something called a Gabber calabash match, like a musical battle, a musician named Gabar apparently asked his rival, Deputy Kelly, "Are you a police or a thief?"
Wow, direct. What was the response?
Kelly supposedly replied, "The governor's man." It shows how it's not just music, it's dynamic communication, social commentary, all rolled into one. Contemporary music, Western genres like hip hop, reggae, jazz has seen a really significant and rapid rise, especially among young people, since the late 1970s. Thanks to tapes, radios, TV. This has led to some decline in certain traditional forms, but also, interesting new fusions are emerging. And festivals are a big part of life, too. You have the major religious ones, Eid al-Fitr, known locally as Korite, and Eid al-Adha, Tabaski. Both involve public prayers, big feasts, distributing gifts. Maulid Nabi celebrates the Prophet Muhammad's birth. Then there are traditional festivals like the Gumsa Abba Festival, which showcases Mandinka culture drumming, masquerades, and annual wrestling competitions are very popular. And of course, Independence Day, February 18th, is a major national holiday with parades and rallies.
That calabash music example really does bring the oral tradition to life, doesn't it? It shows how it functions as more than just entertainment. It's communication, it's commentary. What's fascinating here is just how deeply music and all these cultural practices are woven into daily life and those big milestones. It gives you a really unique window into the Gambian identity. These traditions aren't just static things in a museum. They're living, breathing expressions of who people are.
Absolutely. So, with all that vibrant cultural life, what does it actually mean for daily living, for the economy? Let's try and explore how the Gambia sustains itself. Economically, you can broadly divide it into agriculture and non-agriculture sectors. Agriculture is still the mainstay. It employs about 75% of the labor force and contributes around a quarter of the GDP. Groundnuts, often called white gold, were the main food and cash crop. They contribute over 30% of export revenue and support more than half of all rural livelihoods. So hugely important.
But it faces challenges, right? Small farms, dependence on rain.
Exactly. It's predominantly smallholder farming. There's also a traditional gendered aspect to production, women often doing the manual farming, men typically owning the land and doing the plowing. Poor irrigation is a big issue, and crops are very susceptible to pests. Although there has been some recent private sector investment in horticulture. And government support for inputs like tractors is apparently increasing exports of vegetables, things like green beans, hot peppers, tomatoes. The tourism industry is also absolutely vital. It actually became the #1 foreign exchange earner back in 2006. Bakau, which we mentioned earlier, is a major hub, largely due to its location near the airport and Banjul. The Gambia attracts tourists with its spectacular smiles, majestic rivers, stunning landscapes, diverse wildlife, and rich cultural heritage. That's the pitch. It's seen significant growth since the 80s, over 130 hotels and lodges now, but it does face challenges.
Like what specifically?
Things like water quality issues, health concerns, land degradation from development. And it's highly dependent on seasonal international tourists. That makes it vulnerable to global instability. And of course, the 2020 pandemic hit it hard, like everywhere else. Overall, the Gambia faces some pretty significant economic challenges. Persistent current account deficits since way back in 1978, a small export base. It's even losing its edge as a regional re-export hub, for example, losing business in things like wine to Senegal. Fiscal problems are serious, too. Sources mention widespread economic maladministration, mounting national debt, a declining currency, and lost investor confidence due to undisciplined fiscal management, particularly under Jammeh. Plus, development is held back by things like unplanned land acquisition policies and the current decision to keep mineral resource exploitation off the table for foreign investment, at least for now. And as we touched on, there's been significant neglect of the agricultural sector since the mid-70s. That leads to low productivity, people leaving rural areas, which creates other social problems down the line.
It really sounds like the Gambia is caught in this delicate balancing act. On one hand, they absolutely need to leverage those traditional strengths, groundnuts, tourism, for immediate income. But on the other, they desperately need to tackle these deeper systemic issues. The debt, the management, diversifying the economy to build something more resilient, more sustainable for the long run. What kinds of strategic reforms or maybe external partnerships, beyond just focusing on tourism, do you think are most critical for them to break free from that cycle of dependence and debt and really unlock a more prosperous future?
That is the crucial balancing act, absolutely. And it leads us nicely into thinking about how the Gambia connects with the wider world and what its future might actually hold. Regionally, the Gambia plays quite an active role, especially within ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. It contributes to both regional development initiatives and security efforts. For instance, they participated in ECOMOG forces in Liberia and ECOMIB in Sierra Leone. There have even been discussions about contributing troops to help with other regional crises. So, despite its size, it tries to pull its weight regionally. On the global stage, we came across this really interesting concept called periscope diplomacy. This is where leaders, like President Barrow has done, use social media platforms to speak directly to a much wider international audience.
Sort of bypassing traditional diplomatic channels.
Exactly. It allows for direct engagement, potentially transcending those complex sociocultural and political borders that can sometimes slow down traditional diplomacy. It's not entirely new in Africa, but it's a dynamic way for a smaller nation like the Gambia to make its voice heard globally. However, back home, the Gambia faces persistent internal challenges. Environmentally and regarding land use, there's this ongoing tension. You have groups needing agricultural land versus the government's vision for development, which often involves conservation. And this is all made worse by high population density. There's also the challenge of forging a coherent national identity, trying to balance traditional values and modern aspirations.
That's a common struggle for many post-colonial nations.
Indeed. And the social issues are really pressing. Look at the demographics. 56% of the population is under 25, 75% is under 40. It's an incredibly young country. Youth unemployment is a major concern, running at about 10.3%. Gender inequality is also significant. You see it in education, the legal status of women, and it contributes to problems like unsafe migration and trafficking. Poverty is widespread. Nearly half the population, 48%, lives on less than $1 a day. Sources also highlight a clear need for more frank discussion around issues like HIV/AIDS and gender-based violence. And many women end up in precarious, women-unfriendly occupations in the informal sector. And as we mentioned, there's the ongoing effort to reform mental health legislation, replacing that old 1964 act. So looking ahead, what are the prospects? Development goals are ambitious. There's talk of needing rapid GDP growth, maybe 10% annually by 2035. But crucially, there's also a focus on improving socioeconomic indicators beyond just GDP. Things like reducing mortality, boosting school enrollment, improving access to clean water.
A more holistic view of development.
Exactly. And youth engagement is absolutely critical. That huge youth bulge, 38%, aged 15-35, represents massive potential. But there's also a risk of frustration if their aspirations aren't met. The emphasis, according to our sources, needs to be on facilitation, not hand-holding. Empowering young people to drive their own agenda, advocating on all fronts, from promoting local languages to pushing for economic development, fighting corruption, tackling human rights issues like child neglect and domestic violence.
What's truly fascinating here is seeing how the Gambia, despite being so small, is experimenting with these quite modern forms of global diplomacy,
Right.
like the periscope idea, while simultaneously grappling with such significant deep-seated internal challenges. This combination really raises a profound question. How can a nation, especially one so young demographically with such a complex history, successfully navigate the demands of global integration while also tackling those tough domestic social and economic problems? It seems like they are actively trying to forge their own unique model, perhaps leveraging that youth energy and direct communication. But the path forward is undoubtedly complex.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've journeyed through quite a story, haven't we? The Gambia's unique geographical fingerprint, its ancient roots, the difficult struggles of colonial rule, the complexities of post-independence politics, the incredible resilience shown by its civil society, and its truly vibrant cultural heart. We really hope this deep dive has given you a comprehensive view, helping you appreciate the nuanced story of this small country with a big history, and perhaps a final thought to leave you with. Considering the Gambia's deep-rooted cultural heritage, its recent experience using modern tools like periscope diplomacy, and the absolutely critical role its dynamic youth are playing in shaping the future. What unique model of progress might this small West African nation actually be forging for itself in our rapidly changing world? Something to ponder.